I did not raise my voice. I did not slam the door. I simply nodded, walked back to my truck, and drove the 4 hours home in silence. That was the last Thursday of November, the day my son told me Thanksgiving dinner was only for immediate family. I was standing on his porch with a pecan pie my neighbor Margaret had helped me make the morning before. The pie was still warm when I handed it through the half-open door. He took it without looking at me. He said he was sorry, that his wife's parents had flown in from Connecticut and the dining room was too small, that maybe we could do something in December. He said it the way you tell a delivery driver to leave a package by the mailbox. Polite, efficient, final. I said, "Okay, son, you enjoy your evening." He closed the door before I reached the bottom step. I sat in the truck for a few minutes. The engine was off. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of leaves moving across the pavement. A few houses down, a family was arriving, laughing, carrying casserole dishes, a grandmother holding a toddler against her hip. I watched them disappear inside. Then I started the engine and drove home. I want to tell you who I am before I tell you what happened next, because I think it matters. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years working construction management in the Southeast Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina. I was on job sites before sunrise, and sometimes didn't leave until after dark. I wore the same 3 pairs of boots in rotation. I ate lunch from a cooler in the cab of a pickup truck more times than I can count. I did not take vacations. I did not buy a new car when the old one still ran. I lived below my means deliberately and consistently because I had a plan, and the plan was simple: give my son a better start than I had. My son's name is Daniel. He is 34 years old. He is tall, good-looking, got his mother's eyes and her patience for social situations, which I never had. He graduated from the University of Georgia. I paid for 3 of the 4 years. After graduation, he spent 2 years doing what he called finding himself, which, as far as I could tell, meant bartending in Nashville and spending money without thinking about it. I didn't say much. He was young. I remembered being young. When he was 27, he met his wife. She is from a family in Hartford, Connecticut. Her father is an orthodontist. Her mother does something in interior design. They are the kind of people who say summer as a verb and pronounce the word often with a hard T. I do not say this to be unkind. I say it because it is relevant. My daughter-in-law is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that even now. But she came from a world that measured people differently than the world I came from. In her world, a man's worth was visible. It was in the neighborhood he lived in, the car he drove, the way he spoke at dinner parties. She was not cruel about it. She was simply calibrated that way, the way a compass always points north whether you want it to or not. When Daniel told me he wanted to open a restaurant, a real one, not a bar, a proper farm-to-table place in Asheville, North Carolina, I was skeptical, but I listened. He had a plan. He had a location. He had a chef friend from Nashville who was willing to be his partner. He needed capital. I co-signed a $280,000 business line of credit at a regional bank in Asheville. I also gave him $45,000 in cash as a private loan, no interest, no pressure. Just a promissory note we both signed at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. He shook my hand when we were done. He looked me in the eye when he did it. I believed him. That was 2.5 years before the Thanksgiving I am telling you about. In those 2.5 years, the restaurant opened. I drove up for the opening weekend and sat at the bar and ate the tasting menu and told him it was the best meal I'd had in years, which was true. He was glowing that night. His wife wore a dress that cost more than my monthly utilities, and she was gracious to me in a way that felt rehearsed, the way a host is gracious to a guest they are glad will be leaving soon. I came back twice more that first year. Both times I called ahead. Both times I was told the restaurant was slammed, that he'd love to see me, but maybe I should come on a slower night, a Tuesday maybe. I came on a Tuesday once. He sat with me for 20 minutes before the evening service started, and then he was gone. Back into the kitchen, back into the business. I left a $50 tip for the server and drove home. I told myself this was normal. I told myself he was building something. I had built things. I knew what that took. What I did not know, what I would not know until after Thanksgiving, was that the business line of credit we had co-signed together had been drawn on in ways that had nothing to do with the restaurant. But I am getting ahead of myself. After Thanksgiving, I drove home and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. I drank 2 fingers of bourbon, which is more than I usually allow myself on a weekday. I looked at the photograph on my refrigerator, the one my sister took at Daniel's college graduation, the 2 of us in the parking lot of Sanford Stadium. Him in his cap and gown, me in the good sport coat I'd bought specifically for that day. I am grinning in that photograph, in a way that I do not grin often. I look like a man who has done something right. I went to bed and I slept poorly, and in the morning I made coffee, and I thought about what I actually knew versus what I had assumed. I had assumed the restaurant was performing reasonably well because Daniel had not called me in distress. I had assumed the line of credit was being used appropriately because I had no reason to think otherwise. I had assumed my son respected me even if he did not always show it, because there are many ways to love a person and not all of them look the same. What I knew was that I had been turned away from my son's home on Thanksgiving Day. What I knew was that this was not the first time I had been made to feel like a guest who had arrived at the wrong house. What I knew was that I had not spoken to my son on the phone, a real conversation, not a text message, in almost 6 weeks. I pulled out my laptop. I logged into the business banking portal for the line of credit. I had not looked at it in several months because I trusted him and because checking felt like hovering, and I had always tried not to hover. I looked at it for a long time. The line of credit had a limit of $280,000. The outstanding balance was $241,000. I started going through the transaction history. I want to be methodical about this, so you understand what I found. There were legitimate expenses, food suppliers, linen services, a walk-in refrigerator repair, payroll advances during 2 slow months the previous winter. These made sense. I understood them. What I did not understand were the others. $14,000 charged to a travel company over 18 months, flights, hotel stays, what appeared to be a resort booking in Costa Rica. I knew Daniel had not taken me on any trips. I knew this because he had not invited me on any trips. $22,000 in transfers to a personal account that was not the restaurant's operating account. A recurring monthly charge to a property management company in a city 60 miles from Asheville. Not a storage unit. The amounts were consistent with a rent payment. I sat with this information for a full day before I did anything. I went for a long walk in the afternoon. I raked the leaves in the backyard that I had been putting off. I called my sister in Savannah and talked to her for 45 minutes, about nothing in particular, her grandchildren, a book she was reading, whether the weather had been cold down there. I did not mention any of what I had found. That night I called a woman I trust named Patricia. She is a CPA who handled my business accounts for 15 years while I was in construction. I told her what I had found. I sent her the transaction records. She called me back the next morning, and she used the phrase commingling of funds, and she also used the phrase potentially fraudulent disbursement, and she said that as a co-signer, I had both exposure and recourse, and that I should talk to a bank attorney. I thanked her. I did not call a bank attorney yet. I needed to think. I called Daniel. He answered on the 3rd ring. He sounded distracted. I could hear his wife's voice in the background and the sound of a television. I said, "Son, I need to talk to you about the line of credit." There was a pause. Not a long one, but the kind of pause that contains information. He said, "Dad, I was going to reach out about that. The restaurant has been going through a rough patch. Cash flow has been tight. I've had to make some adjustments." I said, "What's the property management charge in Greenville?" Another pause. Longer this time. He said, "That's complicated." I said, "Okay." He said, "Can we do this in person? I don't want to get into it on the phone." I said, "Sure. I'll drive up Saturday." He said Saturday worked. He sounded relieved. I understood why. He thought coming in person meant I was going to give him the chance to explain, and that explaining would lead to me absorbing the situation the way I had always absorbed difficult situations, quietly, practically, by writing a check or moving a number from one column to another. I drove up Saturday. I dressed well. Dark slacks, a collared shirt, the good leather jacket my brother gave me for my 60th birthday. This matters to me in a way I cannot entirely explain. There is something about appearing composed and put together when you are having a hard conversation that keeps the conversation from becoming something else. It keeps it on your terms. I arrived at his house at 11 in the morning. His wife opened the door and looked at me with an expression that was carefully neutral, which told me she knew this conversation was coming. She offered me coffee. I accepted. She brought it, and then she left to run some errands, which was considerate of her, actually. Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table. He looked tired. He had the particular tiredness of someone who has been managing a secret, the kind that follows you into sleep and is waiting when you wake up. I let him talk. He talked for almost 40 minutes. The story came out in the way stories come out when a person has been holding them in pieces, not entirely in order, with gaps that he filled in when I asked a specific question. The version I assembled from all of this was the following. The restaurant had been struggling since the end of its first year. His partner, the chef, had left 8 months ago over a dispute about money and creative direction. Without the chef, the kitchen had gone through 3 head cooks in 5 months. Reviews had softened. Reservations were down 30% from the prior year peak. His wife's parents had visited twice during this period. She had not told them about the financial difficulties. She was ashamed. She had grown up in a home where financial difficulties were not discussed openly, where appearance was maintained regardless of the underlying reality. Daniel had gone along with this because he loved her and because he believed the restaurant would turn around. The property management charge was an apartment. He had rented it in his name, paid from the business account for a woman he had hired as his floor manager 8 months ago, shortly after his chef partner left. She had relocated from Charlotte. He had told his wife the apartment was a business-related expense for a key employee. He had told himself the same thing for a while. It was not a business expense. He told me this, looking at the table, not at me. He said he was sorry. He said it several times. He said he had made terrible decisions and he knew it, and he was trying to find a way to fix everything at once, and he kept making it worse. I listened to all of it. I drank my coffee. I did not interrupt him. I did not raise my voice. When he was done, I asked him 2 questions. I asked him whether his wife knew about the apartment and the floor manager. He said no. I asked him whether he had any plan, a real plan, with numbers, not intentions for addressing the balance on the line of credit. He looked at me for a moment and then he shook his head. I sat with that for a while. I said, "Okay, son. Thank you for telling me the truth." He looked up. He seemed surprised that this was how I had received it. I said, "I need a few days to think about what I'm going to do. I'll be in touch." He said, "Dad." I said, "I'll be in touch." I drove home. I stopped at a diner outside of Hendersonville and ate a late breakfast alone, eggs, toast, orange juice, and I sat by the window and watched the traffic on the highway, and I thought about who I was going to be now. Because that is the actual question in moments like these. Not what to do with the money, not how to handle the legal exposure, not even what to do about the marriage and the lies and the woman in Greenville. The actual question is who you are going to be, what you are going to require of yourself and of the people you love. I thought about the 31 years on job sites. I thought about the lunches in the truck cab. I thought about the $45,000 on a promissory note and the $280,000 line of credit and the 4-hour drive to stand on a porch and be told the dining room was too small. I thought about something else too. There was a boy. I have not mentioned him yet because he is important enough to require his own introduction. His name is Cooper. He is 8 years old. He is Daniel's son from a relationship before his marriage, a woman named Renee who lives in Spartanburg. Daniel and Renee were together for 2 years in his mid-20s. When Renee got pregnant, Daniel was not ready. That is the honest version. He paid child support reliably, which I will give him credit for. He visited sporadically, which I will not give him credit for. Cooper had been in my life since he was born. Renee brought him to me directly after Daniel moved to Nashville. She was not bitter about it, or if she was, she kept it to herself. She said she thought it mattered for a boy to know his grandfather, and that she was not going to let whatever had happened between her and Daniel make that impossible. I have never said this to her face, but Renee is one of the finest people I know. Cooper stayed with me for 2 weeks every summer. He rode in the truck with me when I did errands. He helped me repair the back fence last summer. handing me boards and holding the level steady. He called me Pop. He told me once, very seriously, while we were eating hamburgers on the back deck, that he wanted to be an engineer when he grew up because engineers figure out how to make things not fall down. I told him that was the best reason I had ever heard for any career choice. I had been putting $500 a month into a college savings account for Cooper since he was born. Not because I was obligated to, because he deserved it. After I got home from Hendersonville, I sat down and I looked at that account. I looked at the balance. I thought about Cooper's face when he talks about things that interest him. Bridges, roller coasters, the structural logic of things. The way he pays attention. The way he listens. Then I thought about the business line of credit. My name was on it. My credit was on it. My retirement was, in some ways, adjacent to it. I did not sleep much that night. But by morning I knew what I was going to do. I called Patricia. I told her I wanted to initiate a review of the cosigner agreement and discuss the bank's process for restructuring or releasing cosigner liability given evidence of misappropriated funds. She said she would put me in touch with someone. She also said, gently, that this process would likely trigger a default review of the line of credit. I said I understood. I called the bank on Monday. I spoke with a commercial lending officer named James, who was professional and careful and clearly accustomed to having exactly this kind of conversation. I walked him through what I had found. I had everything documented: the transaction records, the property management charges, the personal account transfers. I had printed it all, labeled it, put it in a folder. James said the bank would initiate an audit of the account. He said my cosigner liability was a separate matter that would take some time to work through, but that given the documentation I had provided, I was in a defensible position. He said the bank would be contacting the primary account holder, my son, directly. I thanked him and hung up. I called Daniel. He answered immediately, which told me the bank had already been in touch, or was in touch at that moment. He said, "Dad, what did you do?" I said, "I called the bank." He said, "You have no idea what this is going to do. Do you understand what happens if they call the loan?" I said, "I understand what happens if they call the loan, Daniel. I have been co-signed on it for 2.5 years. There was a sound in his voice I had not heard since he was a teenager. Something cracking. He said, "I needed more time. I was going to fix this." I said, "I know you believed that." He said, "How could you?" And then he stopped. I said, "I came to Asheville last month. I wanted to talk to you. I was asked to come on a slower night. I came on Thanksgiving, and I was told there wasn't room. I have been trying to reach you for 2 years, Daniel. Not about money, just to talk. I kept telling myself you were busy. I kept making room for you that you did not ask for." He didn't say anything. I said, "I love you. I am not trying to hurt you, but I cannot protect you from this. You made these decisions and there are consequences, and I cannot be the thing that stands between you and those consequences. Not this time." He said, "Dad." I said, "Call Renee. Call Cooper. That boy is 8 years old and his father calls him maybe once a month. That is something you can fix that costs nothing." I hung up. My phone rang 3 times that afternoon. Once from Daniel, twice from his wife. I did not answer. That evening I got a voicemail from my daughter-in-law. She was upset. Her voice was tight and precise. She said she did not understand why I was doing this to their family. She said I could have called Daniel privately and given him a chance to fix things before going to the bank. She said she hoped I understood the damage I had caused. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I put the phone on the kitchen counter and went outside and sat on the back porch until the sun went down. I want to tell you what I was feeling, because I think people expect that I must have felt vindicated or satisfied, the way you feel when a problem is finally resolved. I did not feel that way. What I felt was something quieter and sadder and more complicated. I felt the particular grief of a father who has done the right thing in the wrong kind of situation, meaning the kind of situation where the right thing and the painful thing are the same thing, and there is no version where you walk away without loss. I had not wanted this. I had wanted a son who called. I had wanted to sit at his table at Thanksgiving. I had wanted to watch him build something real and lasting and be proud of him from a distance that felt like closeness. I had wanted to be the kind of father whose phone number his son dialed when something went wrong, not the kind of father who discovered what went wrong from a bank statement. That grief is real. I am not going to dress it up. But there was something else I felt, and I want to name it too, because I think it deserves to be named. I felt like myself. I felt, for the first time in a long time, like a man who knew exactly where he stood. Not because things had worked out, they had not worked out. They were in the early stages of not working out in ways that were going to be difficult and expensive and emotional. But because I had looked at the situation clearly, and I had acted from my own values instead of from fear. I had not minimized. I had not absorbed. I had not written a check to make the discomfort go away. That feeling of being aligned with yourself is rarer than people think. I was 63 years old and I was feeling it clearly, maybe for the first time in years, and I was not going to apologize for that. The following Saturday, Cooper came to stay for the weekend. Renee dropped him off on her way to visit her sister in Charlotte. He came through the door wearing a University of South Carolina sweatshirt and carrying a backpack, and he said, "Pop, I learned something about cantilever bridges this week." And before he had even taken off his shoes, he was explaining the concept to me with the focused intensity of a boy who has found something that genuinely delights him. We built a birdhouse that weekend. It was something we had been talking about for 2 summers. Cooper had drawn a design in a notebook, measured the proportions, selected the wood at the hardware store with a level of seriousness that made the store clerk raise his eyebrows at me. We worked on it in the garage on Saturday afternoon. He held the pieces steady while I drilled. I showed him how to read a spirit level. He showed me his notebook, where he had worked out the roof angle using a formula he had looked up online. At dinner that night, he asked me if everything was okay. He is 8, but he is perceptive in the way some children are the ones who have learned early to read the temperature of a room. I told him that things were complicated, but that I was fine. He thought about this, and then he said, "My teacher says complicated means it's hard but not impossible." I looked at him for a moment. I said, "Your teacher is right." He nodded seriously and went back to his food. That night, after he was asleep, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and I did the thing I had been putting off for a few days. I opened the spreadsheet where I track my finances, the retirement accounts, the savings, the college fund. I looked at it for a long time. Then I moved money. Not a dramatic amount, not a ruinous amount, but a deliberate reallocation. I added to Cooper's college fund. I reduced the exposure I had been carrying in an account I had originally earmarked for helping Daniel with future investments. It was a quiet act. There was no audience. Nobody saw it, and nobody will know about it in the way that big dramatic gestures get known about. But it felt important. It felt like putting weight where it belonged. The bank audit took several weeks. During that time, the line of credit was frozen. The restaurant, which was already struggling, could not make payroll for 1 2-week period. The chef they had brought in as the third replacement since the original partner left quit. The Greenville situation came out not because of me, but because these things do come out. They always come out. And his wife discovered it through the property management invoices during the audit process. I do not know the details of what happened in that house after that. I was not there. I did not ask. Daniel and I have spoken twice since the bank call, both times briefly. Both times with a careful, bruised quality, the way two people talk to each other when they are not ready to have the real conversation, but they also cannot quite stay silent. He is staying in Asheville, at least for now. The restaurant may survive in a reduced form, a smaller space, a different model. I do not know. What I know is that he called Cooper on a Tuesday in December. Not because of me, I want to be clear that I did not tell him to call, or not after that one time on the phone. He called on his own. Cooper told me about it the following Saturday when I picked him up from Renee's to go to a high school football game. He told me his dad had called and they had talked for a long time, and his dad had said he was going to do better. Cooper said this while putting on his seatbelt, matter of fact, not making a production of it. I said, "How did that feel?" He thought about it. He looked out the windshield at the street. He said, "Good. Weird, but good." I said, "That sounds about right." We went to the game and we drank hot chocolate and we watched a team from 2 counties over beat the home team by 14 points, and Cooper spent half the time asking me how the stadium lights worked, what kind of structure held them up, whether I had ever built something like that. I told him about some of the larger projects I had worked on, the spans and the tolerances, the way you have to account for wind load and thermal expansion. He listened with his whole body, leaning slightly toward me, the way he does. I am 63 years old, and I co-signed a loan that is in default, and my son and I are not where I want us to be, and I don't know how this particular story ends. But I know this. I did not argue. I did not beg. I did not spend the back half of my life making myself small so that someone else could feel comfortable. I paid attention when things didn't add up. I took action that was hard and necessary and mine to take. I put the weight where it belonged. And on a cold Saturday in December, I sat in the bleachers next to an 8-year-old boy who wants to be an engineer, who calls me Pop, who held a birdhouse together with his bare hands while I drilled the hinges into place, and I thought, this is something I did right. This is something I built that is going to stand. The hot chocolate was terrible, by the way. Too sweet. Out of a machine. Cooper drank 2 cups and told me it was the best hot chocolate he had ever had, and I believed him completely.